The dust swirled around Sarah McKenna's boots as she stepped onto the porch of the jailhouse, her father's badge catching the harsh Arizona sun. Sheriff Tom McKenna had been dead for 3 days, and the Apache war paint on the arrow that killed him was still vivid in her memory. She clutched the telegram from Tucson. The territorial governor wanted her to stay on as temporary sheriff until a replacement arrived. A woman sheriff. The thought would have amused her if hatred didn't burn so fierce in her chest. Before we continue with Sarah's story, if you're enjoying this tale of forbidden love in the Old West, please hit that like button, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories from the frontier. Now, back to Red Canyon, Arizona, 1882. Miss Sarah, you sure about this? Deputy Jim Hawkins shifted uncomfortably, his weathered face creased with concern. Maybe you should head back east to your aunt's place. This territory ain't safe for a woman alone, especially not now. Sarah's green eyes flashed. Those murdering savages took my father from me, Jim. I'm not running anywhere. She straightened her shoulders, feeling the weight of her father's Colt .45 on her hip. Besides, someone needs to keep order in Red Canyon until the new sheriff arrives. The town of Red Canyon perched precariously on the edge of Apache territory, a collection of adobe buildings and wooden storefronts that served the nearby copper mine and cattle ranches. Sarah had grown up here, watching her father try to maintain peace between the white settlers and the Apache bands that still roamed the desert. That peace had shattered when Cochise's warriors raided the Morrison Ranch, killing her father and 2 others. 3 weeks later, Sarah was checking the northern patrol route when she heard the gunshot. She spurred her horse toward the sound, hand instinctively moving to her weapon. Through the mesquite and palo verde, she saw a scene that made her blood run cold. 3 men in dusty clothes had cornered someone behind a boulder, firing repeatedly. "Come out, you red devil!" one of them shouted. "We know you're in there." Sarah recognized the voice. Bull Morrison, whose father had been killed in the raid. His companions were the Garrett brothers, known troublemakers who'd been itching for a fight since the attack. She should have been pleased to see them hunting Apache, but something about the situation felt wrong. Moving closer, she caught sight of their target. A young Apache man, maybe 25, crouched behind the rocks. Blood stained his buckskin shirt, and he held an old Spencer rifle. But what struck her wasn't his defensive position, it was the fact that he wasn't wearing war paint, and his horse bore no weapons except a hunting bow. "That's far enough, boys," Sarah called out, riding into the clearing with her badge visible. "What's going on here?" Bull Morrison spat into the dust. "Found this one near the old mining road, Sheriff. Probably scouting for another raid." The Apache man's dark eyes met hers across the desert floor. There was no fear in them, only a quiet dignity that reminded her uncomfortably of something her father used to say: "A man's character shows clearest when he's facing death." "He's wounded," Sarah observed. "What happened?" "Caught him stealing from our supplies," Jake Garrett lied smoothly. "Shot him when he tried to run." Sarah's trained eye took in the scene. The Apache's horse stood 20 yards away, a deer carcass tied to its back. Hunting, not raiding. The blood on his shirt was from a graze, not a serious wound, and he'd had plenty of opportunities to shoot back but hadn't. "Stand down," she ordered. "What?" Bull's face flushed red. "Sarah, that savage might have killed your pa. I said stand down." Her voice carried the authority her father had taught her. This man was hunting, not raiding. "Look at the deer on his horse." "Could be a trick," Morrison insisted, but he lowered his rifle slightly. Sarah rode closer to the Apache, close enough to see the intelligence in his dark eyes. "Do you speak English?" He nodded slowly. "I speak your words." "What's your name?" "I am called Ayana. It means eternal blossom in your tongue." His English was careful but clear. "That's a woman's name," Jake Garrett snorted. The Apache's jaw tightened. "It was my mother's name. I carry it to honor her memory." Something in his voice made Sarah's chest tighten unexpectedly. She knew about carrying the weight of lost parents. These men say you were stealing from them. Ayana's gaze never left hers. I took nothing that was not freely given by the earth. I hunt the deer that drink from the stream. The stream belongs to no man. The hell it doesn't. Bull stepped forward. This is white man's land now. Enough! Sarah's sharp command cut through the tension. She studied Ayana's face, searching for deception and finding none. Against every instinct born of years of Apache raids and her father's recent death, she found herself believing him. You're free to go, she told Ayana. But stay away from the settlements. For your own safety. Bull Morrison's face went purple with rage. You're letting him go? Sarah, what would your pa say? The words hit like a physical blow, but Sarah kept her voice steady. My pa would say that a sheriff's job is to keep the peace and uphold justice, not to murder unarmed hunters. The Garrett brothers exchanged dark looks but mounted their horses. As they rode away, Bull called back, "This ain't over, Sheriff. Mark my words." Ayana had been watching the exchange silently. Now he spoke, his voice soft. You have enemies because of your mercy. Mercy? Sarah's laugh was bitter. I should have let them kill you. My father died because of your people. Not my people, Ayana said quietly. I do not ride with the war bands. I live alone, away from both your people and mine. Why? He was silent for a long moment, tending to his wounded arm with practiced movements. Because I have seen too much death. Too much hatred. It poisons the spirit. Sarah stared at him, unsettled by his words. Everything she'd been taught told her to hate this man, to see him as her enemy. But standing in the desert sun, watching him gently care for his horse before mounting, she felt only confusion. Stay away from Red Canyon, she repeated as he prepared to leave. Ayana nodded, then paused. Your father, he was a good man. He helped my cousin once, when she was hurt and lost. He could have turned her over to the soldiers, but he gave her water and pointed her toward home. Before Sarah could respond, he was gone, riding into the maze of canyons that stretched toward the mountains. That night, Sarah sat in her father's chair on the jailhouse porch, cleaning his old Winchester and trying to make sense of the day. Jim Hawkins brought her coffee and settled into the other chair. Heard about what happened with Bull Morrison, he said carefully. Town's talking. Let them talk. Sarah, that Apache, you sure you did the right thing? Sarah set down the rifle and looked out at the desert stars. I don't know, Jim. I honestly don't know. But she did know one thing. She couldn't stop thinking about the quiet dignity in Ayana's eyes, or the way he'd spoken of her father with respect instead of hatred. 2 days later, she was patrolling the eastern boundary when she found the warning. Stones arranged in a specific pattern near the old mission ruins, a message her father had taught her to read years ago. Apache sign for danger. She was still studying the stones when the rifle shot cracked across the desert. The bullet kicked up dust inches from her feet, and she threw herself behind her horse, drawing her Colt. Should have minded your own business, Sheriff. Bull Morrison's voice echoed from the rocks above. Now you're gonna pay for protecting that red devil. More shots followed, forcing Sarah to scramble for better cover. She counted at least 3 guns, Morrison and the Garrett brothers, just as she'd suspected. They had her pinned down in the open, with nowhere to run. That's when the war cry split the air. Ayana came down from the ridgeline like an avenging spirit, his horse at full gallop. He had no rifle, only his bow and a tomahawk, but he struck the ambushers from behind with devastating effect. Jake Garrett went down first, an arrow through his shoulder. His brother Tom spun to face this new threat and caught a tomahawk handle across his skull. Bull Morrison, panicked, swung his rifle toward Ayana just as Sarah rose from cover. "Drop it, Bull," she shouted. Morrison hesitated, caught between 2 enemies, and in that moment of indecision, Ayana was on him. They grappled for the rifle, rolling in the dust and stones. Morrison was bigger, but Ayana was faster and fought with the fluid grace of a natural warrior. The rifle went off harmlessly into the air, and then Ayanna had Morrison pinned, a knife at his throat. Stop! Sarah had her Colt trained on them both, though she wasn't sure who she was aiming at. Let him go. Ayanna looked up at her, breathing hard. For a moment, she thought he might ignore her command and finish Morrison. The desire for vengeance burned in his dark eyes. She recognized it because she'd felt it herself. Instead, he released Morrison and stepped back, hands raised. Why? Sarah asked, her gun still drawn but no longer aimed at him. Why did you help me? Because you showed mercy when you could have shown hatred, Ayanna replied simply. Because your enemies became mine when they tried to murder you for doing what was right. Bull Morrison climbed to his feet, spitting blood. This ain't over, Sheriff. The whole territory's gonna hear about you taking sides with the Apache. Get out of here, Sarah said wearily. Take your friends and go. If I see you threatening anyone else, I'll throw you in jail. After Morrison and the wounded Garrett brothers limped away, Sarah found herself alone in the desert with the man she'd been raised to hate. The silence stretched between them, filled with the sound of wind through the Joshua trees. I should arrest you, she said finally. For protecting you? For being Apache. But even as she said it, the words felt hollow. Ayanna studied her face. You do not believe that. He was right, and it terrified her. Everything she'd believed about Apaches, about the clear lines between good and evil, was crumbling like adobe in a flash flood. My father, she began, was killed by warriors seeking revenge for wrongs done to their families, Ayanna finished quietly. Just as you seek revenge for wrongs done to yours. The circle of hatred has no end, unless someone chooses to break it. And you think I should just forget? Forgive. I think you should choose what kind of person you want to be. That night, Sarah didn't return to town. Instead, she made camp in the desert, telling herself she was being cautious, watching for more trouble. But the truth was simpler. She wasn't ready to face the questions and accusations that would be waiting for her in Red Canyon. She was building up her fire when she heard the horse approaching. Her hand went to her gun, then relaxed as Ayanna rode into the circle of light. Thought you might want company, he said, dismounting. The desert can be lonely at night. You shouldn't be here. If anyone from town sees you, then they will see an Apache and a white woman sharing a fire, he said calmly. Perhaps it is time they learned that enemies can choose to become something else. He settled across the fire from her, close enough to talk but far enough to respect her wariness. For a while, they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the coyotes calling in the distance. Tell me about your father, Ayanna said eventually. Sarah tensed. Why? Because you loved him. Because understanding your grief might help me understand your hatred. So she told him. About growing up without a mother, about how Tom McKenna had raised her to be strong and independent. About his stories of the early days, when Apache and Mexican and white settlers had sometimes traded peacefully. About his death and the terrible emptiness it had left behind. In return, Ayanna spoke of his own losses. His parents, killed in a cavalry raid when he was 14. His younger sister, dead of the white man's diseases. The gradual erosion of his people's way of life, the endless cycle of attack and revenge that had driven him into the wilderness alone. You said you don't ride with the war bands, Sarah said. But you fight like a warrior. Ayanna poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the dark sky. I learned to fight to survive. But I have never killed a man who was not trying to kill me first. Violence should be the last choice, not the first. Tell that to the men who killed my father. Would it bring him back? The simple question hung in the air between them. Sarah felt tears she'd been holding back for weeks finally spill over. No, she whispered. Nothing will bring him back. When she looked up, Ayanna had moved closer. Not close enough to touch, but close enough that she could see the compassion in his eyes. Your father raised you to be a peacekeeper, he said softly. Perhaps the best way to honor his memory is to keep the peace. They talked until dawn, sharing stories and slowly, carefully, beginning to see each other as human beings rather than enemies. When the sun rose over the eastern mountains, painting the desert in shades of gold and red, Sarah realized something had changed between them. The walls of hatred and fear were still there, but they had cracks in them now. "I have to go back to town," she said. Ayanna nodded. "And I should return to my camp." "Where is your camp?" He pointed toward a distant canyon. 2 days' ride north. Near the old Spanish ruins. "That's dangerous country. Army patrols come through there." "I know how to avoid patrols." They parted ways at the crossroads, but Sarah found herself looking back more than once as she rode toward Red Canyon. Each time, Ayanna was still visible on the horizon, a lone figure against the vast sky. The town was buzzing with rumors when she arrived. Bull Morrison had been spreading his version of events, claiming Sarah had conspired with Apache raiders. The town council was meeting that evening, and several members had already hinted that they were reconsidering her temporary appointment. "It's getting ugly, Sarah," Jim Hawkins warned her as she cleaned up in the sheriff's office. "Half the town's ready to form a vigilante committee. They're saying you can't be trusted to protect white folks." "And what do you say, Jim?" The old deputy was quiet for a long moment. "I say you're Tom McKenna's daughter, and that's good enough for me. But I also say you better be careful. There's talk of sending for the territorial militia." That evening's town council meeting was as hostile as Sarah had expected. Mayor Harrison, a portly man who owned the general store, called for order as angry voices filled the small schoolhouse that served as their meeting hall. "The question before us," Harrison announced, "is whether Miss McKenna is fit to continue as sheriff, given recent irregularities in her judgment." Bull Morrison stood up, his arm still in a sling from his encounter with Ayanna. "She let an Apache warrior go free. Then she took his side against white men. How can we trust her to protect our families?" "He wasn't a warrior," Sarah said, rising to face the crowd. "He was hunting alone on unclaimed land. I upheld the law, nothing more." "The law?" Mrs. Peterson, the preacher's wife, spoke up shrilly. "What law says we have to coddle murdering savages?" "The law that says a man is innocent until proven guilty," Sarah replied evenly. "The same law my father swore to uphold." "Your father's dead because of them," Morrison shouted. "And you're acting like they're your friends." The accusation hit home, and for a moment Sarah felt the old rage rising. Then she thought of Ayanna's words about choosing what kind of person to be. "My father died doing his duty," she said quietly. "He died trying to protect this town and everyone in it. But he also believed in justice, not revenge. He taught me that hatred poisons everything it touches." The crowd erupted in angry voices, but Sarah continued, raising her voice to be heard. "If you want a sheriff who'll lead lynch mobs and ignore the law, then you'd better find someone else. But if you want someone who'll keep the peace and protect the innocent, all the innocent, then I'm your woman." The vote was close, closer than Sarah had hoped. She kept her badge by 3 votes, but the victory felt hollow. Half the town now saw her as a traitor, and the other half was watching to see if she'd prove them wrong. Over the following weeks, the tension in Red Canyon grew thicker than desert dust. Sarah threw herself into her duties, patrolling regularly and trying to maintain order, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking on a tightrope over a canyon full of rattlesnakes. She didn't see Ayanna again for 2 weeks, though sometimes she found small signs that he was watching over her, stones arranged to warn of danger, tracks that showed someone had checked her camp while she slept on patrol. The knowledge that he was out there should have made her nervous. Instead, it made her feel less alone. When they finally met again, it was at the old Spanish mission ruins where he'd left the first warning. Sarah had ridden out to investigate reports of horse thieves, but found only wind-carved stone and memories. "You came," Ayanna said, emerging from the shadows of the collapsed chapel. "I was investigating a report," Sarah said, but her heart was beating faster than the situation warranted. "There are no horse thieves here." Only a man who hoped you might come. The honesty in his voice made her chest tight. Ayanna, this is impossible. You know that. Many things seem impossible until they happen. He stepped closer, and she didn't step back. Your people and mine have been enemies for generations. But we are not our people. We are ourselves. It doesn't matter what we are. The whole territory would explode if they knew we were. If they knew. If they knew what? He asked softly. Sarah struggled for words. What were they? Friends? Allies? Something more dangerous than either? If they knew we cared about each other, she said finally. Ayanna's hand moved toward hers, stopping just short of touching. Do we? Care about each other? The question hung in the desert air like morning mist. Sarah looked into his dark eyes and saw her own confusion reflected there, along with something deeper and more frightening. Yes, she whispered. God help me, yes. This time when he reached for her hand, she didn't pull away. His fingers were calloused from hard living, warm and strong. The touch sent electricity up her arm and straight to her heart. This is madness, she said, but she didn't let go. Perhaps madness is what the world needs. They stood there in the ruins of the old mission, holding hands while the wind whistled through broken stone and overhead, a red-tailed hawk circled in the cloudless sky. For a moment, Sarah could almost imagine they were just a man and a woman who'd found each other in the wilderness, without the weight of history and hatred between their peoples. Then reality crashed back down like a mountain avalanche. We can't, she said, pulling her hand free. You know we can't. Cannot or will not? Both. She turned away, unable to look at him. I have responsibilities. To the town, to my father's memory, to a hatred that serves no one? His words stung because they were true. It's not that simple. It is exactly that simple. We choose love or we choose hate. We cannot choose both. Love. The word escaped before she could stop it. Ayanna was quiet for so long that she turned back to look at him. When she did, she saw something in his face that made her breath catch. Yes, he said simply. Love. Sarah felt the world tilt around her. This couldn't be happening. She couldn't be falling in love with an Apache warrior while wearing her father's badge and carrying his gun. It was wrong on every level she could think of. But her heart didn't care about wrong or right. Her heart only cared that this man had risked his life to save hers, had treated her with respect and gentleness, had shown her that enemies could become something else entirely. Ayanna, she began, then stopped. What could she say? That she felt the same way? That every day since they'd met she'd thought about him? That she'd started to see the world differently because of him? I know, he said, reading her silence. You feel it too. It doesn't matter what I feel. It is the only thing that matters. Before she could argue, he stepped back. I will not ask you to choose between your duty and your heart. But I want you to know, if things were different, if we had met in another time, another place. If we had met in another time, we never would have met at all, Sarah said sadly. It's this time, this place, this terrible situation that brought us together. Then perhaps even terrible situations can create something beautiful. That night, Sarah lay awake in her father's bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to understand what was happening to her. She'd always been practical, focused, sure of her path. Now she felt like she was wandering in unmapped territory without a compass. The next morning brought news that shattered her fragile peace. Jim Hawkins burst into the office, his face grim. Sarah, you need to see this. He handed her a telegram from the territorial capital. Army's sending a patrol through next week. They're hunting Apache raiders, and they're asking for local support. Sarah's blood went cold. What kind of support? Guides, trackers, anyone who knows the local Apache hideouts. And I suppose Bull Morrison has volunteered? Him and half the town. They're calling it a chance to finish what Cochise started. Sarah crumpled the telegram in her fist. The army patrol would sweep through the canyons north of town, exactly where Ayanna made his camp. If Morrison guided them there. When do they arrive? 3 days. Sarah's mind raced. 3 days to figure out how to warn Ayanna without exposing herself, how to protect him without betraying her badge. 3 days to choose between her duty as sheriff and her feelings for a man she barely understood but couldn't stop thinking about. That afternoon, she rode out on patrol, ostensibly checking the southern boundaries but actually heading north toward the canyons. She had to warn him. She had to. The ambush came without warning. One moment she was riding through a narrow defile between red rock walls, the next moment gunfire was echoing off the stone and her horse was screaming as it fell. Sarah rolled clear of the dying animal and scrambled for cover, drawing her Colt as bullets whined overhead. She counted at least 4 shooters, positioned on the canyon rim above her. Professional work. They had her trapped with no way out. "Sarah McKenna," a voice called down. She didn't recognize it, but the accent was military. "You're harboring Apache fugitives. Surrender now and you won't be harmed." Fugitives? Sarah's mind reeled. What fugitives? Unless… "I don't know what you're talking about," she shouted back. "We know you've been meeting with the renegade called Ayanna. We know you warned him about the Morrison raid." Sarah's heart sank. Someone had been watching them. Someone had seen their meetings and drawn the worst possible conclusions. Ayanna's not a renegade. He's not even with the war bands. That's not what our sources tell us. More gunfire erupted, forcing Sarah deeper into the meager cover of fallen rocks. Her situation was hopeless. She was outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped in the open. Sooner or later, they'd work their way down from the rim and finish her. Then she heard the war cry. Ayanna appeared on the canyon rim like an avenging angel, moving with impossible speed and silence. Sarah watched in amazement as he struck the ambushers from behind, his bow singing death. 2 men went down before the others knew he was there. The remaining ambushers, Sarah could see now that they wore cavalry uniforms, tried to turn their guns on this new threat, but Ayanna was already among them. His tomahawk flashed in the desert sun, and suddenly the canyon was silent except for the wind. "Sarah," Ayanna called down. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," she called back, though her hands were shaking with reaction. "But we need to get out of here. There'll be more coming." Ayanna rappelled down the canyon wall with a rope, landing beside her with cat-like grace. "My horse is hidden in the next canyon. We can ride double." "We?" Sarah stared at him. "Ayanna, those were soldiers. If they find us together. If they find you alone, you will hang as a traitor," he said bluntly. "They came to kill you, Sarah. Someone has convinced them that you are working with Apache raiders." The truth of it hit her like a physical blow. She'd been set up, probably by Bull Morrison and his allies. They'd found a way to get rid of her that didn't require a town council vote. "I can't run," she said. "I'm the sheriff. I have duties." "You have a life," Ayanna interrupted. "And if you stay, you will lose it." He was right, and they both knew it. Sarah looked around the canyon that had nearly become her grave, then at the man who'd saved her life for the second time. "If I go with you, there's no coming back," she said quietly. "I'll be branded a traitor and a renegade. I'll lose everything. You will lose everything anyway if you stay." Sarah closed her eyes and thought of her father, of the badge she wore, of the life she'd built in Red Canyon. Then she thought of the soldiers who'd just tried to murder her, of the town that had turned against her, of the choice between a life of hatred and a life of love. When she opened her eyes, Ayanna was watching her with infinite patience. "All right," she said. "Let's go." They retrieved Ayanna's horse and rode hard toward the mountains, putting distance between themselves and the canyon ambush. As they climbed into the high country, Sarah felt like she was leaving more than just Red Canyon behind. She was leaving her entire identity. "Where are we going?" she asked as they paused to rest the horse at a mountain stream. "North," Ayanna said. "To Canada. There are Apache there who have found peace. We can live among them, or we can find our own place in the wilderness." "As what?" Fugitives. As people who chose love over hate. That night they made camp in a hidden valley high in the mountains. Sarah sat by their small fire, still wearing her father's badge, still carrying his gun, but no longer sure who she was. I keep thinking I should go back, she said. Face whatever charges they bring. Fight to clear my name. With what evidence? Against what witnesses? Ayanna fed small branches to the fire. Your enemies have planned this well. They will say you betrayed your people for an Apache lover. Half the territory will believe it without question. Is that what I did? Ayanna looked at her across the flames. What do you think? Sarah considered the question seriously. Had she betrayed her people? Or had she simply chosen to see Apache as human beings instead of monsters? Had she fallen in love with an enemy, or had she discovered that enemies were only people who hadn't learned to understand each other? I think, she said slowly, that I chose to be the person my father raised me to be. Someone who believes in justice over revenge, law over lynch mobs, peace over war. Then you have betrayed no one except those who profit from hatred. They were quiet for a while, listening to the night sounds of the mountains, owls calling, small animals rustling through the underbrush, the distant howl of wolves. What happens now? Sarah asked. Now we build a new life, Ayanna said simply. It will not be easy. We will face suspicion from both our peoples. We will have to be strong and clever and very careful. But we will be together. And that's enough? For me, it is everything. Sarah looked at this man who had given up his solitary existence to save her, who was now asking her to give up everything she'd known to be with him. The smart thing would be to leave in the morning, try to slip back across the border, maybe find a new life somewhere far from Apache territory. But she didn't want to be smart anymore. She wanted to be brave. Ayanna, she said. Yes. I love you too. He was beside her before she could blink, his arms around her, his lips on hers. The kiss was gentle but desperate, full of all the words they hadn't been able to say. When they broke apart, Sarah felt like she could breathe properly for the first time in weeks. Are you sure? He whispered against her hair. Once we cross that ridge tomorrow, there is no going back. Sarah thought of her father's badge heavy against her chest. Slowly, she unpinned it and held it in her palm, feeling its familiar weight. My father used to say that a badge doesn't make a person honorable, she said. Honor comes from the choices we make when no one is watching. She stood and walked to the edge of the firelight, then threw the badge into the darkness beyond. The sound of it hitting stone seemed to echo through the entire valley. When she turned back, Ayanna was watching her with something like awe. No going back, she said firmly. No going back, he agreed. They spent their last night in American territory wrapped in each other's arms, planning their uncertain future. They would head north to Canada, find a place where mixed couples could live without constant fear. Sarah would use her law enforcement skills to find work. There were territories up north that needed sheriffs and didn't ask too many questions about the past. Ayanna would use his knowledge of the land to guide them safely through the wilderness. It wouldn't be easy. They would face prejudice and suspicion from all sides. Their children, if they had any, would belong fully to neither world. But they would be together, and they would be free to love each other without shame or fear. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Sarah and Ayanna broke camp and began their journey north. Behind them lay everything they had known, their peoples, their cultures, their identities. Ahead lay the unknown, dangerous and full of possibility. At the crest of the final ridge, Sarah looked back one last time at the desert country where she'd been born and raised. Somewhere down there, Red Canyon was waking up to discover that their sheriff had vanished in the night. There would be rumors and speculation, search parties and wanted posters. She would become a legend, the sheriff's daughter who betrayed her own people for love. Let them tell their stories, Sarah thought. She knew the truth. Ready? Ayanna asked, his hand warm in hers. Sarah turned her face toward the north, toward Canada, toward their new life together. Ready. They rode down the far side of the mountain into the unknown, two hearts that had found each other across the vast canyon of hatred and fear. Behind them, the sun climbed higher into the desert sky, burning away the shadows of the night. In the years that followed, there would indeed be stories told around Red Canyon campfires about Sheriff Sarah McKenna and the Apache warrior who stole her heart. Some would paint her as a traitor, others as a woman driven mad by grief. But the wisest storytellers, the ones who understood that love was always stronger than hate, would tell a different tale. They would speak of two people who chose to build a bridge across the canyon of hatred, who proved that enemies could become lovers, that understanding could triumph over fear. They would tell of hearts that refused to be divided by the arbitrary lines drawn by history and prejudice. And sometimes, travelers passing through the northern territories would report seeing them, a woman with green eyes and a man with the grace of the desert wind, working together to help other outcasts and refugees find their place in the world. Always together, always watchful, always free. The desert remembers everything, they say. And if you know how to listen to the wind through the canyons, you can still hear the echo of their story, a love song written in defiance of a world that said such love was impossible. Some canyons are carved by water, others by wind. But the deepest canyons of all are carved by the human heart, and sometimes, if we're very brave and very lucky, we find someone willing to help us build a bridge across them. Sarah McKenna and Ayanna found that bridge in each other, and in crossing it, they discovered that the other side of hatred isn't just love, it's freedom.